Wait, pause for a second. Something quiet, something almost invisible has just shifted, and if you stopped scrolling for a reason, it's probably because some part of you already sensed it before your mind could explain it. There's a weight in the air around them tonight. Not heavy, not crushing, just present. The kind of stillness that follows a question they've been refusing to ask themselves for a long time. Because tonight, somewhere across the distance between you, your person is sitting in a small group of people, engaged in a conversation they didn't expect would turn personal. And without any warning, someone said something about you, out loud, in front of them, and it didn't roll off the way other comments usually do. It stuck. It landed in a place they had been keeping locked for months. If this message speaks to your heart, comment, "I receive this love," like the video, and subscribe for more. Now let me walk you slowly into what's happening on their end, because the truth of this moment is far more layered than it looks from the outside. There isn't a dramatic scene unfolding. No raised voices, no tearful confessions. What's happening is something much more honest, and much more uncomfortable for them. They're being exposed to themselves through someone else's mouth. Set the scene with me for a moment. It's evening. The kind of evening that started out simple. A few people gathered somewhere familiar, a friend's place, a quiet bar, a corner of someone's apartment with the lights low and the music soft. The kind of night where they thought they'd just decompress, laugh a little, let their mind rest. They had no plans for anything emotional. They were going to keep things light. They were going to keep things on the surface, the way they've been doing for a while now. But somewhere between the third drink and a lull in the conversation, a person they trust, not someone they expected this from, leaned in slightly and said something about you. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't accusatory. It was honest. It was the kind of comment that came from someone who had been quietly observing the entire arc of what happened between you two and had finally found the moment to speak. Maybe it was something like, "You know, you don't talk about them anymore, but I can tell you still think about them." Maybe it was, "I always thought you two were the real thing. Honestly, I still do." Or maybe it was simpler, just your name, said with a particular softness, followed by a pause that did most of the work. And in that pause, your person felt something they weren't prepared for. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here than what's on the surface. What they felt wasn't sadness exactly. It wasn't longing exactly either. It was something more complicated. A sense of being seen in a way they hadn't been seen in a long time. Because the truth is, they've spent months curating a very controlled version of how they appear in front of others. The version that's doing fine. The version that's moved on. The version that talks about new plans, new routines, new distractions, anything to keep the surface smooth and unbothered. And it's been working, mostly. The people around them stopped asking. They stopped having to perform. Until tonight. Until one person, with one honest sentence, broke the spell. Because here's the strange thing about being known, you can hide from yourself for a long time, but the moment someone who actually pays attention says the quiet part out loud, the hiding becomes impossible. They felt the air shift in their own chest. They went still for a second, just a second, before reaching for their drink a little too quickly, hoping no one noticed, hoping that small motion would distract from the way their face had momentarily stopped knowing what to do. But internally, something opened, and they couldn't close it. This is where things quietly began to shift. For the next stretch of the night, they tried to keep the conversation moving. They participated. They made jokes. They responded when spoken to. But anyone watching closely would have seen the difference. They were a step behind. Their laughter was timed slightly off. Their eyes drifted. Their hand returned to the glass more often than it needed to. Not because they wanted to be drunk. Because they wanted to be a little less in their head. They wanted to dull the edges of whatever was rising in them. But what they didn't realize is that alcohol doesn't dull this kind of feeling. It only loosens whatever is holding it back. So with every sip, the wall they built around your memory got just a little thinner. And eventually, the wall stopped working entirely. This is where understanding slowly begins. Their mind started doing something it hadn't allowed itself to do in a while. It started drifting toward you. Not in a planned way. Not in a moment of weakness they could pinpoint. Just naturally, the way water finds the lowest point in any room. And what came up wasn't the obvious memory, not the big argument, not the moment things ended, not the last conversation. What came up was something smaller. A throwaway moment. The kind that shouldn't matter and somehow does. Maybe it was the way you used to text them when something reminded you of them, random, unprompted, real. Maybe it was a specific look you gave them once when you thought they weren't paying attention, and they were. Maybe it was the way you said their name. Just that. Something so ordinary that it shouldn't have any weight, except that weight is exactly what it has now. They sat there holding that memory for a few seconds while the conversation moved on without them. And in those few seconds, an intrusive thought came through, quiet, fast, unwelcome. Why does this still feel unfinished? They didn't have an answer. They didn't want to look for one. So they took another sip and tried to push it back down. But the thought had already been thought. And those kinds of thoughts don't fully go away. They just go underground, and they keep working from there. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. Because here's what they starting to realize tonight, even if they not putting words to it yet, they have been avoiding something for months. Not avoiding the relationship in some general sense. Not avoiding their feelings in some abstract way. Avoiding one specific thing. One specific action they know, deep down, they need to take. And every day they don't take it, the avoidance gets a little heavier. Like a small debt that grows quietly in the background of their life, even though they never look directly at it. That action might be a message. It might be an apology. It might be a real conversation they've been postponing. It might be admitting something to themselves first, before they can even think about admitting it to you. Whatever it is, and only they know exactly what it is, they have been ducking it, stepping around it, coming up with reasons why now isn't the right time. They probably don't want to hear from me. It would just make things worse. What's the point? And tonight, every one of those reasons is starting to sound thinner than it used to, because the third person's words exposed something simple but devastating. They exposed the gap between the story your person has been telling themselves and the truth that's been sitting underneath it. They've been telling themselves they've moved on. The truth is they've been frozen. They've been telling themselves they don't care anymore. The truth is they care exactly as much as they did before. They've just stopped letting themselves feel it. They've been telling themselves that reaching out would be weakness. The truth is, not reaching out has been the easier choice all along. If this resonates, let it settle in you. Don't push it away. Now this is where things start to get interesting on their end. Because once a person catches themselves in their own pattern, something shifts internally, even before they take any visible action. Their body language changes. Their voice softens. They become slightly less reactive, slightly more thoughtful. The people around them might not even notice the difference, but something is happening underneath. And in that softer state, more memories started to surface. Not just one. Not in a flood, but in a slow, steady drift. They remembered a small thing you said once that they brushed off in the moment but think about more often than they admit. They remembered a time when you reached for their hand and they didn't quite reach back the way they should have. They remembered a moment where you tried to express something hard, and instead of sitting in it with you, they retreated into being practical. They remembered, in pieces, all the small instances where you were brave enough to be vulnerable, and they were too scared to meet you there. And those memories aren't coming up to torture them. They coming up because some part of them is finally ready to look at them honestly. This is the part they still trying to understand. There's a particular kind of regret growing in them tonight, and it's important to name what kind it is. It's not the loud, self-pitying kind. It's not the dramatic, I ruined everything, kind that you see in movies. It's the quiet, mature kind. The kind that doesn't beg for forgiveness because it knows forgiveness isn't owed. The kind that sits with itself in the dim light of an evening that turned more reflective than expected and just stays, just lets itself be felt. That kind of regret is actually the beginning of growth, because it doesn't deflect. It doesn't blame circumstances. It doesn't blame you. It looks itself in the eye and says, I was the one who let this drift. I was the one who didn't show up the way I should have. I was the one who chose comfort over courage. And once a person admits that to themselves, they can't quite go back to who they were before. You don't need to force this. Just feel it. Here's something I want you to understand about what your person is moving through. When someone has been avoiding an action for months, they usually convince themselves that the action is more dangerous than it actually is. They built it up in their head as something that would crack their world open, as something that could only end badly, as something that requires more courage than they have on any given day. And so they wait, and they wait, and they tell themselves they waiting for the right moment. But the right moment doesn't arrive externally. It arrives internally, when they finally stop being able to live with the avoidance. And that's exactly what's starting to happen tonight. Somewhere between the music in the background and the soft echo of what was said about you, they feeling, for the first time in a long time, that the avoidance has become heavier than the action would be. Reaching out, having the conversation, sending the message, saying the words, whatever it is, has started to feel less terrifying than continuing to live in the in-between. That's a very real shift. That's not something I am exaggerating for effect. That's a genuine internal turn that anyone who has ever procrastinated something emotional will recognize. It's the moment when carrying it gets harder than facing it. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything inside them. They started looking at their phone. Not in the way you look at a phone for entertainment. In the way you look at it when someone is on your mind and you, trying to decide what to do with that. They scrolled past contact names without meaning to. They opened a thread, looked at it for a few seconds, closed it, opened it again, closed it again. They didn't type anything, but the thumb hovered. The thought formed. The possibility opened. And in that small, almost invisible moment, something changed in them that they probably won't be able to fully articulate even to themselves later. They went from, I am not going to reach out, to, what if I did? That distance, the distance between those two sentences, is enormous. It's the distance between staying stuck and starting to move. And tonight, they crossed it. Maybe just for a second. But once you cross it, the road back gets harder. There's a verse that fits this kind of moment quietly, not as preaching, just as something soft to hold. There is a time for every purpose under heaven. And maybe what they didn't understand for months is that timing isn't always about you being ready. Sometimes timing is about them finally being honest with themselves. And that kind of readiness can't be rushed, only arrived at. If you felt this shift too, you already understand. Now, here's what's important for you to know about this whole evening. Your person isn't going to come out of this and immediately do something dramatic. That's not how this works. Real shifts don't usually announce themselves. They don't text you the next morning with a long, tearful message. They don't show up at your door. The shift that happened tonight is internal. It's foundational. It's the kind of shift that changes the soil before anything visible grows. And growth always takes a little longer than people expect. But here's what is going to start happening in the days that follow. They're going to find themselves thinking about you in moments they used to be able to redirect. The brain, once it's been given permission to feel something, doesn't easily give that permission. They'll be doing something completely ordinary, driving, making coffee, walking to a familiar place, and a thought of you will arrive without warning. And instead of pushing it away the way they used to, they'll let it sit for a few seconds longer. They might even smile slightly. They might even feel a small ache they don't try to fix. That's progress. That's the wall coming down, one quiet brick at a time. And eventually, that softness in them is going to translate into something visible. A message. A call. A reaching out, however hesitant. Maybe it won't be a grand gesture. Maybe it'll be small. Hey, I was thinking about you. Do you have a minute? Something simple. Something that takes more courage than it looks like from the outside. Because the simple words are often the heaviest ones. They're the ones that have been waiting the longest to come out. Stay with this, because what's underneath all this matters more than the action itself. What's underneath all of this is a person who has been carrying the weight of an unmade decision for too long, and who is finally, quietly, on a night they didn't see coming, starting to put that weight down. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And the action they've been avoiding for months is going to come, not because they suddenly became someone else, but because they finally stopped being able to lie to themselves about who they are and what you actually meant to them. Here's something subtle but important. The reason this had to happen this way, through someone else's voice, in a moment they didn't see coming, is because if it had happened through their own thinking, they would have rationalized their way out of it again. They've been doing that for months. They're good at it. They've built a whole internal toolkit for talking themselves out of feeling things. But that toolkit doesn't work when the truth comes from outside. It can't argue with someone else's honest observation. It can't dismiss it. It can only sit with it. And that's exactly what was needed for this shift to actually take. So in a way, the third party who spoke about you tonight was doing something they didn't even know they were doing. They were creating the small opening that your person couldn't create for themselves. They were saying the thing your person had been silently knowing but actively refusing to acknowledge. And whether they ever realize it or not, they did something that mattered tonight. They moved a small piece on a board your person had refused to look at for too long. This is the quiet meaning underneath what just happened. Things have a way of finding their way to the surface when they meant to. You don't have to push them. You don't have to force them. They arrive, often through the most unlikely channels, at the most unlikely moments, and they do their work whether anyone is watching or not. For you, the person on the receiving end of all this, there's nothing required of you tonight. No reaching, no waiting, no checking your phone every 5 minutes. What's happening on their side is theirs to walk through. Your role is much simpler. Your role is just to keep being who you are, to keep tending to your peace, to keep showing up for your own life, to trust that what's true between two people doesn't disappear just because one of them tried to walk away from it. And the truth is, they did try. And it didn't work. And tonight they're starting to see why. There's a calm that comes with this kind of knowing. It's not excitement. It's not anticipation in some anxious sense. It's something quieter, a settling. A sense that you don't have to fight for what's already pulling itself toward you. A sense that the universe doesn't waste real connections, even when humans temporarily mishandle them. A sense that the path is unfolding even in the moments when nothing visible is happening. So tonight, if you feel something soft in your chest, something warm, something almost bittersweet, let it be there. Don't analyze it too much. Don't try to make it mean something specific. Just let it be the proof that whatever is shifting on their end is rippling toward you in its own quiet way. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to confirm it. You just have to trust it. Because the action they've been avoiding for months isn't being avoided anymore. Not really. The decision has already started forming inside them, even if they haven't said it out loud yet. The wall has already begun cracking, even if it hasn't fully fallen. And whatever comes next on their end will come from a more honest place than anything that came before. And what they're beginning to realize now is something they can't walk away from anymore. Not this time.